I'm Rob Wilds, and I'm a student here at Sonic Prep. Well, I feel pretty sad. Obviously, it's devastating for a lot of communities here. I wasn't really, I guess, directly affected by it, but I mean, I definitely feel for those who were. I've just, I guess, been thinking about, like, do I really need to go outside, or if I do, like, what am I going to get out of it? For instance, like, if I'm exercising, I generally try to do that inside more, especially with smoke. Our basketball practices have been moved inside on numerous occasions. And then even just when I'm driving, I generally like to have my windows down, but right now I don't. Yeah. I'm not sure if they have a choice, if they are allowed to like opt in or not. If they were, I mean, it's their choice, so they don't have to do it if they don't want to do it. But at the same time, it is kind of like corrupt. It's almost like slave labor in a way. I'm sure it's a very complicated issue.
Sure. Patrick Oliver. I teach AP Environmental Science here at Sonic Prep. As an environmental science teacher and as an amateur naturalist who's been studying fire ecology for recreational interest since 1997, I feel fire is inevitable. It's complicated right now because it's tied to a lot of other factors we're going to get into. Completely unsurprised about the scope of the fires and the intensity of the fires. The one thing that I am surprised about is how swiftly it went from starting to bringing catastrophic amounts of smoke into the Bay Area. That's faster. The spread of the fire has been faster than we've seen. What I think is the most oversimplified way to view fire is that, so particularly in the West, from Nebraska all the way to the Pacific, and especially in the Southwest, fire is like one of the dominant drivers of ecosystem change. So fire recurs in California, depending on where you are, on a 3 to 30, 50, or 100 or 500 year cycle. So fire is present in the landscape. The native people who lived here, what we might call Ohlone, Miwok, all Castanoan native people, set fire on purpose in order to produce more grass because they hunted animals. And the animals don't eat conifer needles so much. And also they dug roots and tubers and collected seeds from species that respond in the post-fire. And so, to frame it, for thousands of years, there was no firefighting, there was no houses in the wilderness. It was like fires came from lightning in the Sierras or other places, and they may burn cool, whatever. There's a whole varying sort of level of intensity of fires, a whole tapestry of complicated fire effects on the landscape. And every year, every 3 years, every 5 years, every 7 years, every 10 years, native people set fires on purpose in order to burn back forest, in order to keep grasslands. So I think people would be surprised, and if you look at pictures of San Francisco in the turn of the century, if you look at pictures of UC Berkeley in 1900, you look at pictures of Stanford, how much of the Bay Area was open grasslands? So much more open grasslands. You look at the Sierra foothills and Southern California around LA and Ventura, so much of what is now closed canopy of forest or chaparral was 130 years ago grasslands. When we removed fire, because we stopped setting fires on purpose, white people, or for lack of a better word, but Westerners, Mexicans, Spaniards, and then whatever, the settlers, stopped setting fire on purpose. So we removed setting fires, and then we moved to aggressively fighting fires. And so pushing fire from the landscape the past 120 years has been good for human development, but of course it's delayed the inevitable. By native people constantly setting fires and by wildfires constantly burning, you have lots and lots and lots and lots of cool burns that move across the landscape, and they don't kill big ancient trees and they don't cause massive soil problems. But they have the effect of weeding forests and cultivating fire-dependent species. I know this is kind of long-winded, but when we remove the fire, you have encroaching chaparral, brushlands, and fuel loads.
Yeah.
So, this is before we even get to climate change. So subtract that, which is a wild card, which we'll get into. So, I think everyone involved, of course, these are all very politicized issues in our day and age, but I think everyone involved at this point is like, yeah, we need to aggressively manage for fire to the extent that wildlands fires are burning in wilderness areas or aren't threatening structures. Now the protocol is to let them burn. Clearly that's not possible in the peninsula. To the extent that it's possible to light fires on purpose, what are called controlled burns or managed burns, to the extent that that's possible, people are doing that. So that's been happening in Yosemite and Kings Canyon and places where that's possible. But of course, California is a very urbanized landscape, and so even where the Paradise campfire started, you wouldn't think of it, it wasn't urban like San Mateo's urban, but there are roads, power lines, houses, and urban development, so we call that the urban wildlands interface. So if we could sort of magically wave a magic wand and during certain times of the year aggressively set fires in advance, that would be great. That's very complicated by all the property that's involved, and it's difficult to control fire too. So you might want to keep it to a certain area at a certain time, but controlled fires are hard to keep under control as well. So there's a great aversion against setting fires on purpose, because whoever sets the fire, if it burns a structure, they become liable for that. So there's a conflict there. And then the final piece is there's a lot of real sort of partisan argument about how to manage forests specifically. So people want to harvest as much timber as possible to have a viable timber industry, and that involves clear cutting and replanting with even-aged species of young forests. Unfortunately, they burn really fast and really hot, and forests that are least likely to burn are oldest, biggest trees. So just logging per se is not necessarily the answer, but the kind of work that needs to be done to thin forests is not particularly profitable. Meaning, where you used to have in the Sierras 30 or 50 trees per acre, now you might have 500 trees per acre because it hasn't been burned in 120 years. To go in and hire a crew of people with chainsaws to thin and chip trees to reduce the fire danger, no one makes money doing that. There's no product that you can sell. It's not profitable. So that's another problem, is like the treatment for fire prevention doesn't make anyone any money. So it's like a whole new pot of money that needs to be brought up. I know I raised a lot of complicated issues here, but you can see how there's not like a magic bullet fix.
It's interesting like how it's so unbalanced now that like there's no real answer to the problem. So like we can have controlled fires now, but there's so much fuel because we've stopped fire for hundreds of years that like there's so many liabilities, like you're saying, like that structure got burned down. Like that's why I think it's interesting.
We're seeing a shift in national forest lands in the West, so the big public forest lands, from maximum timber production to biodiversity and water quality and all these other shifts, and that corresponds nicely with letting wildland fires burn, trying to do controlled fires when we can, finding money to do thinning and clearing projects that reduce fire loads that incidentally will produce timber products and jobs. So balancing that need between like endangered species and not just doing industrial forestry and just taking all the big trees. That's complicated and political. It's worth mentioning, I know this is a lot of information, but your generation, it's actually a fact of life of climate change. When I was your age, people actually argued tobacco doesn't cause cancer. And it seems insane now, but people argue that, and there were scientists paid for by the tobacco industry who said that. So during the Clinton years, I've had some problems with the Clinton administration for different reasons, but one of the things that they did was they went after the tobacco companies to say, no, that's not science. Like tobacco clearly causes cancer, and their lying and defrauding to the public has economic and political consequences. The climate conversation has reached that point where it's like for 20 or 30 years people have been arguing, oh, climate change is not real, or human influence on the climate is insignificant, or whatever. But we know ExxonMobil and other oil companies had internal research that shows, yeah, that's true. We know it's true. We know this is the effect. But we still have people arguing that, like, oh, tobacco doesn't cause cancer, or climate change is not real, or humans are not influencing climate change. We're beyond that in terms of this school values AP environmental science and, you know, San Mateo County and Silicon Valley culture in California. We value science. We understand it's not fake news. That climate change is real. Humans are driving it. It's like carbon emissions are making the planet warmer. That's a big, big problem for California for a long list of reasons. One of which is warmer correlates with drier, longer dry season. I know this is a lot of information, but for example, right now it's the middle of November.
Yeah.
So this is not a desert. We have huge forests up on the hills. You know, in an average year, we could look up San Mateo County average rainfalls. November is not 0 inches of rain. Like usually by Halloween, by the middle of October, we have that one rain. There's a sprinkling of rain, the rainy season begins, it cools off. One of the scary things about climate change is that the drier season is lasting longer, and especially in Southern California, you can be getting into year-round fire season. We saw that at the end of the drought 3 years ago, where there was forest fires raging in January, which is like, it might rain at Thanksgiving, but if we don't get any rain, fires will continue to break out, and there will be new fires going until there's a good rain. Then the cycle sort of reset. Over the winter, it's rainy, it's cool, fires are out. During the spring, depends kind of what spring we have, right? There's a whole flush of vegetation, there's a natural cycle, and then as the summer dries out, by middle of June, July, depending upon the year, you start getting back into fire season. So the length of the fire season is determined by whether or not we get any rain, how much rain we get, and how long the rainy season lasts. Climate change equating to warmer and drier, that's a big driver of fire, if for no other reason than the fires can't burn if it's raining. I mean, they can, it depends. If it's only a little drizzle, they might sputter along, but a good, hard Northern California rain will end fire season.